At this time, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Glennon Bagsby. Glenn.
Hello, Jerry. Good afternoon. Can you confirm you see my slide and can you hear me okay?
Yes to both, Glenn.
Okay, great. I would thank all of you for coming out. I appreciate it. As Jerry said, we're going to be talking about one of the products from New Era Software called Standalone Environment. It's part of a group of products that we've kind of put a big banner on called the Integrity Controls Environment. And it has to do with several products, and SAE is one of them. A little bit of background before I get into much detail here. What we're going to look at today is the SAE product, as I said, and it was the product with which we started our company some 30 plus years ago. Across all that time, we've always provided the same level of goals and expectations for our products, and that is to help you do your job to protect the operational readiness and integrity of the systems and the applications that run on them, and now in a ZOS or ZOS world, in the Sysplex, across all the different LPARs, all the major subsystems. So we've got really three major products that help us do that. As I said, Standalone Environment is one we're going to talk about today, but the Image Focus product and the Control Editor product are also products that fit into this design and this goal of helping you protect the operational readiness, as I said. I'll touch on those other two products only because in the newest releases of Standalone Environment product, we have connectivity between Image Focus and SAE and the Control Editor and Image Focus. So we want to make sure that we understand those relationships as we go forward. And fitting them all together gives you a complete, not only a recovery tool with SAE, but monitoring and integrity controls with the Image Focus and Control Editor product. If you think about it, what we really are trying to do with these products is to help you establish, maintain, and enforce standards about how you do things, about how things are done within your environment when improvements are being made, changes, new upgrades, simple modifications, major modifications, whatever. Make sure that you are aware of all of those events, that they're captured, recorded, documented properly. All the people who need to know about those events are being informed of those events. There's recovery points automatically created. There's ability to analyze and forensically go back and look at what it may have changed that caused the problem, if a problem is detected. All of those things are what these three products allow you to do. And so that's why it's important that they kind of work in concert with each other. And you'll see that as we go forward with the SAE presentation, as we get in a little bit more deeper into this. I'll talk first about the Image Focus product because it gives us the ability to basically perform a process we call an inspection, that it looks at the process that you wish to test. Think of it in terms of an IPL, where you give it an IPL address and load parm, and it runs through the IPL logic and determines whether or not all the components are there, they're all defined correctly, all the resources are where they're supposed to be, things like mount points and APF authorized data sets, all of those things are proper and correct, and making sure that it's across not only the operating system, but the major subsystems, including your RACF settings and your policy agent settings for TCP/IP. Look for possible failures and program starts that may cause a problem, like a System 47 ABAN because of authorization problems. Check ICSF and a whole bunch of other things, and give you the ability to run this in a variety of ways in order to test that readiness or that integrity of that particular process. So you can look at definition files for the system that's running, or the same files for a system that's never been IPL'd before, and give you back that evaluation. Now, what's important about this from an SAE standpoint is that we put in a new interface into this, where we can now run a batch execution of that inspection process that allows us to pass the results to the Standalone Environment product. And I'll show you that as we get deeper into this. But basically, the idea is if I have an IPL failure and I need to know what has changed since the last successful IPL, this batch job can answer that question for me. If I execute the batch job immediately after an IPL, it will create out, think of it as a baseline or a profile but it's a copy of all of the components that were used to IPL that particular LPAR and stores those away. And then through SAE, I can now read that data source and compare that against the current settings and identify what modifications that may have been made since that last IPL, pointing you to a direction of where the problem may be. And in fact, as part of that batch job, there is an inspection process. So if the problem was actually detected at the last IPL or whenever that batch job executed, it would come out as an error warning or a notice in that particular inspection log. So this is one of the new tie-in points between what Image Focus is able to do in its inspection processes versus what SAE is able to allow you to correct and fix once you know where the problem may be or what needs to be backed off or improved or whatever the action needs to be. Now, the control editor also contributes to that, in that the control editor is designed to be out there so that you know when a change has been made. And again, document it, enforce the standards for things like automatic backups, enforce the standards for notification of the teams whenever something has changed in their area of responsibility, provide the ability to automatically create a backup, as I said, but can compare that backup against other versions of that same component and actually allow you to restore back to a prior point. So all of this information now is being stored away and created by the control editor and passed to Image Focus, which then can be passed on to the standalone environment product. So that's how these three are going to work together. One's going to track the changes, record them, and post the changes. Another is going to ensure that that change, whatever it is correct, has not introduced some kind of a risk or a problem into the structure itself where it's being used. And then if there is a problem, use the standalone environment product to either back it off or fix it or do whatever you need to do to get past that problem at IPL time. So the standalone environment product, as the name indicates, it's a little utility that you can IPL directly into an LPAR definition. That IPL can come from a DASD device. It can come from tape if you still have a tape drive. Come from if you can IPL from the HMC, from a CD-ROM or a USB drive or a network file, and actually load the entire program in to that LPAR definition and give you the ability to edit, copy, rename, create new data sets, alter catalog pointers, a whole bunch of things that you're able to do, and we'll touch on some of those as we go forward. But it's kind of the ultimate recovery tool. And like I said, we started our company with this some 30 years ago. It's very popular. A lot of people around the world use it as kind of their ultimate recovery tool or insurance policy. We have some customers that have some interesting war stories to tell about it. And even more that will say, look, I'm not going to get rid of this thing. It's too important to me. It's saved me too many times. It has the edit functions. It also has utility functions in there like erasing DASD volumes, overwriting data extremely fast under your control. And then the new features is the ability to run that detection services for change that I talked about with that new batch job, with that SAE batch job. So this would run under the control of the Image Focus application, but it would create out that profile or that baseline that SAE can pick up and do comparisons in order to identify exactly what has changed since the point in time when the profile was created. So if you're doing that again immediately after an IPL and you run that job and you freeze that, then you know what the system looked like last time you successfully brought it up. The other new improvement here is the ability to interface with SAE from the HMC integrated console. This is a new capability that we've introduced in this release of SAE. So some of you looking at the list are customers of this. You may not be aware of it, but this gives us a great deal more flexibility and capability to use the recovery capabilities. So historically, the way SAE would work is you would IPL it into an LPAR, and that LPAR would have to have attached to it a locally attached 3270 terminal in order to be the communications vehicle to the application and be able to execute, edit, for example, or whatever you need to do to fix the problem. This became a problem, or has been a problem, and we solved it now by making some changes to the way SAE is able to communicate. This is still supported, so you can still IPL it into one of those LPAR targets. And if you have a locally attached 3270, you can bring up SAE on that panel. or excuse me, on that device and use it interactively. It's a single user, single use application. So as soon as you use it and you log off, then all that's freed up and then you'd re-IPL your regular system. But what we've done in this new release 17 is we've now said, look, we have the ability to let you IPL from the HMC. That's been there for a while, where you could IPL again from a CD-ROM or a network file from even a USB stick if it's allowed on that device, and load the entire program into your target LPAR. But the difference is now we can communicate back to the HMC integrated console. So that requirement of having a locally attached 3270 terminal no longer exists. We can actually use the HMC console in order to be our application interface and let you do things directly from there. And I'll show you what this looks like in just a moment. So what this really means is you don't need to install SAE anywhere. You can create a copy, put it on a stick or on a secure FTP site or on a CD-ROM or whatever, and IPL it from the HMC to any possible target and use the integrated console on the HMC to do your communication. So you don't have to pre-plan or pre-expect where you might have a failure. You simply put it someplace where you can get to it and you can IPL it on any target that's managed by that HMC and have the terminal session come back to you there. So this becomes very powerful in that it gives you the ability to recover anywhere. And again, you can IPL this from a lot of different sources, and you can have multiple copies of it. So you could have a copy on DASD if you want to IPL it from there and still come back to the HMC, or you could come in from one of the other devices and talk to the HMC or talk to your local 3270. All of this is capability that you're there that allows you to say, look, in the worst case scenario, you can bring this up without ever having installing it, without ever pre-planning some type of emergency, and give you what frequently referred to as a bare metal edit capability. So you can actually go in and do whatever you need to do to fix some kind of a failure or a problem in the environment. Now, for those of you who are customers and you're going to install release 17, there's some new keywords you need to look for. And this is an example of them. There's 3 or 4 unique ones or new ones in there. And what these basically are saying, in this case, it's telling us how we want to use the integrated console, and typically called SysG. And the default is to try first. So what would happen is when you IPL SAE, it would look and see if the integrated console is there. And if it is, it will write to it and begin to communicate directly with that console. Or you can enable it, in which case you need to specify that you want it to go out to that terminal address, or you can disable it if you don't want it ever going out there. If you use enable or disable and you do not specify that load parm, it will work in its traditional fashion, which it will IPL. It will sit into storage on that particular target LPAR and wait for an interrupt from a locally attached 3270 terminal, and then own that terminal, and that would be your communication vehicle into the application. But this try first, or this use of the SysG, is very important because it gives you that great deal of flexibility and recoverability across the entire Sysplex and all the possible LPARs that you have connected to a single HMC device. This is the first panel that you'd see when you come in, and it basically says, here I am. I'm SAE. I just initialized, and from this point, I can go ahead and do things. I've got some screenshots in the slide deck that I'm going to send you, including this one. But what I want to do instead is just go over and show you real time what this looks like. So now I switched over to a 3270 screen. Jerry or someone, can you confirm you can see it okay?
Looks good, Glenn.
All right, thank you. Okay, so what I've done, I've got a little VM system that I can play around with here. It's restricted. It's only got a couple of DASD volumes on it. But as you can see, what I'm going to do now is just simply IPL a copy of SAE. And, excuse me, gotta get this right. And you can see right away, it went out and it found SysG, and it came straight up onto the integrated console on this. So I set the integrated console back to this port, and that's what I'm talking to now. So this, just how fast this is. I'm running on, again, a little VM guest. And so I don't have available everything I need to do a regular full system kind of a recovery because of it, but I can show you the basic functionality. So once I'm on this panel, I can go and begin to do my work. Now, in this case, I hit enter, and this is the first entry point into the application. And there's a lot of different things we can go through here, but it intended to be very easy to follow. You'll see it looks just like ISPF as much as we can, but there are no requirements for any external data sets or files or functions at all. So even if the ISPF libraries are disappeared, we would still be able to function. Even if there's no catalogs, we'd still be able to function. We're not relying on anything at this point in time. We're doing everything on our own, self-contained by what was loaded from your IPL source. So let's go ahead and look at some of these settings. So what do I want to set up? I can set up a printer. So if I want to print something in here, and we'll see some examples of that, I can set the tide if the clock is wrong. I can reuse different volume selection lists. So there's some options here generally applied. All of the screens, or most of the screens, have help panels. So if you're ever in the product and you're trying to figure out how to do something, just hit an F1 and you can go back and read the help and know a little bit more about what you can and cannot do. But the key to this is really the ability to tell SAE where I want to work. What do I want to accomplish, and where is that resource I need to take action against? And that's typically what you would begin by using action services. Now, this is the panel that comes up where you would define the universe of devices that you want to have access to. So in this case, you can see all kinds of examples here of, I can specify a particular, I can specify wildcarding, I can use a range, I can do adds, includes, and excludes with these special characters. So if I leave this blank, the same thing is true for the vol series, or I can specify information. But if I leave it blank, it goes off and searches all the volumes attached to this particular LPAR. Now, again, I'm on a small VM, so I only have 2 drives. The one drive is the volume that I IPL'd from. You'll see that SAE, when you display DASI devices, will display for you if there's any IPL text on those volumes. So it makes it very easy to see where your IPL volumes are in case that's one of your problems, is you're not sure which volume you should be using or want to understand or edit something there. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to select this particular volume because perhaps I've got an IPL failure and I need to change a ParmLive data set. So what I'm going to do is just go grab one of my test files here. We'll come down to just select this ParmLive. Now, the first thing it's going to do is, by default, there's a security check in here that says we've put a security capability on that you have to know a password if you want to get to a particular volume to make a change. Now, there's 15 different combinations of levels of security that you can apply to the product, and it's described within the user's guide and the options job when you build your copy. But in this case, the default is set. And then once you know that password, then it allows you past that. You can disable that entirely, or you can make it more restrictive, your choices. So in this case, I've passed the challenge, and now I want to come in and I want to edit a particular member within this data set. Select it, and now I'm in edit. So you can see it looks a lot like and acts a great deal like ISPF. So it's, again, something familiar. You don't have to learn a new language or new set of commands in order to use this product, because it's designed to be used whenever you need it and you're almost desperate or you need to get past a problem. You make your edit change, you save the member, and you're done. And it's just that simple. It's just, you have the ability to do all the other services in here. You can rename a member, you can delete a member. By selecting a member with a member name, it creates a new member. You can rename a member as well. So you can do it in a couple different ways with the selection commands on how you want to do your renames. But this gives you the ability to, again, control those content within these particular data sets if you know where you need to go. If I go back to my prior panel here, you can see that I can really get specific in my search by putting in a particular volume or a particular vol seer. It will search and go find that and match. I can put in a data set name if I'm not sure where it's at. Now you have to be careful with this, because if you have a large set DASD farm out there and you put in just a data set name, it's going to search all the DASD volumes and give you all of them where that name matches, cataloged or uncatalogued. So this could take a little bit of time, but it will answer the question for you and give you back the same selection list that matches your search criteria. And this is the panel. Again, we could set this up on the options where I want to reuse the prior lists. In my case, it makes it easier, so I don't have to go through that search criteria again. So what are some of the other things we can do here? If I go ahead and select this one again, one of the things that I want to be able to do maybe is to deal with an ICF catalog. So if I come down here and say I want to select this, and I can again specify a data set name or a volume if I want to search. In this case, I'm just going to leave it blank, and it gives me all of the entries that are in this particular catalog. If I need to, for some reason, change this, I can come over here and change this from work B to work A. And now it's updated this. So I've now updated the catalog entry point to find that particular data set on work A instead of work B, because somehow it got moved and something didn't get changed or whatever. Or maybe I did have two copies of it, one bad, one good, and I needed to address it and do something like that. From the same point, I can go back and find that data set that I wanted to edit a while ago and select it from here. And I'm back into the same edit entry point where I can make my edit, make my changes, and do whatever I need to do. And again, I have copy capability. I can copy between data sets. I can create new data sets on a particular volume and copy them into them. You can see I can not only edit and browse, I can actually zap data sets. All of that information or capabilities exists here. So if I go to the bottom of this, one of the things I might want to do is to do that zap command. And so here I am now looking at a member that's obviously non-editable, but if I know what I'm doing, I can go in and change the content of this by using zap, and it does a zap in place and we'll save that member, and I've made my improvements and changes. So that's basically the idea for SAE, its fundamental capabilities to do that kind of recovery actions of edit, copy, create, rename, whatever you need to do to get past that problem. But the other services that we talked about here was this new service called Detect. And that's going to tell you perhaps where you need to go or what you need to understand in order to make your changes. So let's look at this. I'll go to option 4. And I have the ability to look at 3 different pieces of information created by the image focus product. Image focus product, again, is the one that runs an inspection, evaluates what it's looking at, and either builds history points. These are what we call blueprints that are built on a timer basis. So maybe once a day I run this and it goes off and runs a set of inspections and it says, okay, I've looked at this system and I detected these changes and here's my evaluation of those changes. They're good, they shouldn't cause a problem, but it creates out a new history for that day. The other thing is to look at those data created by that batch job that I talked about before. One is actually the baseline, which is a copy of the members, and the other is the log itself. So if I go back, I forgot to do this, so excuse me just a minute, I want to come back into this and pull out the right data set name. So what I'm looking for now is one of those baselines. So here I have a baseline that was created on my system D, as we call it, and the log was the analyzed it. So if I copy this and now come back over and go back into 4 and say I want to look at that baseline, it will now go off and it's run a comparison. So it's comparing the baseline that was created by image focus and stored on that volume against the current copy of the same members. Now, again, as I pointed out a couple of times, I'm on a very restricted system, so I don't have all these other volumes mounted. which is why it shows up an error. But you can see where I do have the volume mounted, it's done a comparison and said, hey, there's a difference between the content that was in the baseline and the content the way it looks right now. And it documents that for each of the components as we go down and shows me those changes or those differences that existed. So imagine you've got that scenario, that chart up where you've had, 30 different LPARs on, 4 or 5 different sysplexes that you're controlling through the HMC. If you run that batch job after each IPL and you create out a baseline for each one of those, then regardless of which one fails, as long as you have access to the baseline created, you can do this comparison and determine what's different for that system since the last successful IPL. And then if it's a matter of editing a member or changing the catalog or creating a new one or whatever you need to do, you can do that or copy over it in order to replace it and put it back a version. All of that is capability exists for you. And if I go back and now look at the third data source, which is the baseline log, this is actually the log that analyzed the system for me. And it tells me exactly what image focus detected when it ran that batch job and created out its analysis for the system. Now, those of you who are customers of image focus know that image focus creates out what's called a message summary. These would be all of the warnings or alerts that came out from that inspection. So again, if you're familiar with this, and you're using both products, you can go to SAE in case of emergency and say, show me what was wrong or what has changed or what I need to deal with in order to get past this particular problem. So SAE is a very functional tool, provides a lot of capability to make changes, but it also gives you the capability to understand what is causing the problem. And that includes the subsystems of JES, VTAM, TCP, IP, any JCL file that you've got out there that's somehow causing a problem. Maybe the TSO logon proc took a JCL error and you can't log on to TSO or whatever the different problems may be. With SAE, you don't need any of that stuff. You can get right in to the device itself and make changes and improvements and solve your problem. And you even have the ability to do that directly by talking to from a hardware perspective. So one of the ways we can do this is use hardware confirmation. And this again gives me all the devices attached again to my little VM environment. And from here, I could go down and select the volume I want to deal with. And I could get there the same way as I showed you before. Here's my my data set list on this particular volume. I mentioned the erase feature. I'm not going to run that, but basically what it allows you to do is to erase DASD volumes extremely fast. So once again, you would be able to get a listing of all the DASD volumes attached. You can qualify those with the same kind of selection panel that we saw before. So I want to erase all the devices that start with 500 and go to 700. I could do that very easily. It will run the erase. It will just overwrite all the data either with a 0 or a pattern you define. It will create out a log or a report to be printed off, which is why you might want to set up a printer. There's audit records maintained in here as well. So even if you're not doing erase, but you're doing edit activity, it can create the audit report for you as well. So there's all kinds of underlying functions to help you know what's being done through this application and track it, record it, make it visible to everybody that needs to know what's happening. So it's not like you're working in a black box. It has the ability to create its own audit record and its own tracking and versions of things as you go through. So it's important to remember that. So that's a quick run through of SAE. Again, the main benefits here are the fact that we now have the ability to show you all of this. Here are my screenshots for you. We get to the summary here. The main important things that we've added in release 17 are the change detection services, where we can use the information created by image focus in its blueprinting, which is part of the background monitor for image focus, and in its batch jobs, the SAE batch job in particular that runs that and creates that profile or that baseline. And then probably most significant is this, the ability to let you use the HMC, not only to IPL it anywhere you need it, but to use the integrated console on the HMC to be your entry point and communication vehicle for that application in order to recover from whatever problem may exist. So that kind of concludes the overview of SAE. I know I covered a lot pretty quickly. I tried to keep it to about 30 minutes, and I think we're pretty good on that. But I will take any questions or comments from anybody that's out there. Again, I see from the list of attendees that some of you are customers. So if you have particular questions, feel free to ask them at this time.